This is ASMR News. Drift off, wake up, or simply relax with the world's biggest headlines. I'm very excited to announce that today we have a special guest who will be reading the news. Twitch and YouTube ASMR artist, Eyevoree. You can find her live streaming ASMR on Twitch at twitch.tv/Eyevoree. That's spelled Eyevoree. She also has a YouTube channel called Eyevoree ASMR. You can find links to both her Twitch and YouTube in the episode description.
Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden selected California Senator Kamala Harris to be his vice presidential candidate. Harris, of Jamaican and Indian descent, becomes the first woman of color and the third woman overall to be selected as a candidate by a major party for the second highest office in the United States. Previous major party female vice presidential candidates are Geraldine Ferraro, who ran with Walter Mondale in 1984, and Sarah Palin, who ran with John McCain in 2008. Harris has an undergraduate degree from Howard and a law degree from the University of California. Prior to being elected to the U.S. Senate, she was the Attorney General of the state of California. President Trump reacted to the selection of Harris almost immediately, calling her nasty and disrespectful. A day before the announcement, Trump has said that Biden's early commitment to selecting a female running mate could be seen by some as an insult to men. In response, Harris called out Trump's mismanagement of the COVID-19 crisis and his handling of race relations in her first speech as the VP candidate, signaling how the Democrats will likely attack Trump during the campaign. U.S. congressional leadership sent a letter to the Postmaster General demanding he reverse operational changes that could affect mail-in voting in November. The new head of the Postal Service implemented cost-cutting measures, including the elimination of overtime, a mandate that mail delivery be delayed until the next day if distribution centers are running late, a hiring freeze, and the removal or reassessment of 24 postal leaders. President Trump has maintained that mail-in voting is subject to corruption, despite studies that show otherwise. The new head of the service, Louis DeJoy, a Trump campaign contributor, is the first Postmaster General in 2 decades to be appointed without Postal Service experience. QAnon supporter Marjorie Taylor Greene won the Republican primary in Georgia's 14th congressional district and is expected to be elected to the House of Representatives in the heavily conservative district. Greene, who owns a construction company with her husband, would be the first devotee of the conspiracy in the U.S. Congress. The unfounded theory says that Donald Trump is waging a war against Satan-worshipping pedophiles in the government, business, and the media. The FBI has designated QAnon a potential domestic extremist threat, and a number of social media organizations have taken action to remove hashtags and ban users who refer to the conspiracy. She has been condemned by party leaders for her videos, in which she expressed racist, Islamophobic, and anti-Semitic views. On the other end of the political spectrum, Ilhan Omar easily won the Democratic primary in Wisconsin's 5th congressional district and is likely to win re-election to Congress. Omar is the first Somali American and one of the first 2 Muslim women elected to Congress. She is known as part of The Squad, a group of 4 progressive congresswomen of color, including New York Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Massachusetts Rep. Ayanna Pressley, and Michigan Rep. Rashida Tlaib. Omer was condemned by party leaders in 2019 for anti-Semitic statements. Russia became the first country to register a coronavirus vaccine and said it could be available as early as November. President Vladimir Putin made the announcement Tuesday morning, saying that it has passed all the necessary tests and that his daughter took part in the testing. However, Western medical specialists remain skeptical since Russia based the registration on tests from 76 people in Phase 3 clinical trials, which involve thousands of participants, have not yet taken place. In addition, no data from the trials has been published, though Russia said the data would be available later this year. At the end of July, the World Health Organization said that there were 26 vaccine candidates in the clinical evaluation stage. New Zealand reported 17 new cases of COVID-19 after 102 days with no new cases. Initially, 4 members of the same family tested positive and were put on self-isolation for 14 days, and contacts of those infected will self-isolate until they have been tested. Through contact tracing, an additional 13 cases have been discovered. Authorities have not yet determined the source of the infection, since none of the family members have traveled overseas. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said, "Once again, we are reminded of how tricky this virus is and how easily it can spread." Questions are being raised about the accuracy of COVID-19 data in the U.S. as it reports a decline in the number of cases due to decreases in the number of tests performed. While the number of daily cases has declined over the past 2 weeks from 65,000 in mid-July to 53,000 in the most recent reports, the number of tests has declined from 814,000 to 716,000. The decline in testing is most severe in states with the most infections, which skews the numbers of the overall cases across the country. A high school in the state of Georgia was closed, and more than 1,000 students and staff were quarantined after 14 students tested positive for COVID-19. Etowah High School gained widespread attention recently when photos were posted showing scores of students without masks. In northern New Jersey, the Elizabeth School District Board voted unanimously to begin the school year remotely after 375 teachers refused to return to their classrooms due to the coronavirus fears. A recent study of school districts projects half of all U.S. students will attend classes remotely this fall, 25% will attend classes in person, and 19% will combine online learning and in-person learning. The remaining districts are undecided. A sheriff in Marion County, Florida, has issued an order preventing his deputies from wearing masks, claiming that masks hinder communication by muffling voices. His order comes after the city council voted to require masks in public places, following the guidance of most health officials that masks help prevent the spread of COVID-19. But the Republican sheriff, who was elected in 2016, has not been convinced by scientific evidence, the latest example of partisan politics affecting health decisions. In other parts of the country, officials are increasingly requiring the wearing of masks in public places. In Miami Beach, one of the hardest hit communities in the U.S., police have issued $14,000 in fines to people who refuse to wear masks. In Illinois, it is now a felony to assault a worker who is enforcing a mask-wearing policy. And in New Hampshire, wearing a mask is now required in gatherings of more than 100 people. AMC, the largest movie theater chain in the US, announced it will open 2/3 of its theaters by September 3rd, with 100 to open on August 20th. It said the remaining theaters would open when officials say it is safe to do so. In the announcement, AMC described its plans to keep moviegoers safe, limiting seating capacity, practicing social distancing, a mandatory mask policy, and extra cleaning and disinfecting. In Manhattan, the number of empty apartments reached 13,177, more than double that of last year, as residents fled the city and landlords struggled to find new tenants. Rental rates also fell by 10% on average, the steepest decline in over a decade. Even so, rental rates are not cheap. The average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $4,620 a month. The decline in rentals is likely to have a ripple effect throughout the economy. Many apartments are owned by small businesses who, without rental income, may struggle to meet mortgage payments. In addition, without income, tax revenues will decrease, which may impact the level of services the government can provide, making the city less attractive to new residents. Spain's western region of Galicia has banned smoking in public after a study showed the potential for increasing the spread of COVID-19 by inhaling droplets when smokers exhale. Other Spanish regions are considering a similar ban as Spain suffers from a resurgence in the number of cases, which have increased from 150 a day in June to more than 1,500 a day in August. China has announced a clean plate program to reduce food waste in the face of concerns about food supply in the face of the pandemic, as well as weeks of flooding in southern China, which have wrecked farms and damaged food supplies. Traditionally, an empty plate is considered a sign of disrespect, implying the host did not provide enough food. Several Chinese cities have reported finding coronavirus on frozen food. In recent days, health authorities have found the virus on frozen chicken wings from Brazil and on frozen shrimp from Ecuador. The detections, found in routine screenings, have raised fears of new outbreaks similar to one which occurred in a food market in Beijing in June. So far, 6 Chinese cities have reported coronavirus presence on frozen food packaging. Negotiations remained stalled on a second stimulus package in the United States. Initially, the House of Representatives, controlled by the Democrats, passed a $3 trillion package, and the Senate, controlled by Republicans, proposed a $1 trillion package. The Democrats have since reduced their proposal to $2 trillion, but Republicans say this is still too much. Initial jobless claims fell below 1 million in the U.S. for the first time since March, indicating the economy continues to recover from the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. However, unemployment remains historically high. Before the pandemic, the worst week on record was in 1982, when 695,000 submitted claims. This week, 963,000 filed claims. Overall, more than 30 million Americans are unemployed, or just over 10% of the workforce. In the meantime, President Trump has been focusing his energy on loosening standards for showerheads. The Department of Energy issued new rules on Wednesday that allow increasing water flow from 2.5 gallons per minute to 10 gallons per minute, following Trump's complaint at a press conference in July that insufficient water flow made it impossible to keep his hair perfect. The water-saving rules were put in place 28 years ago. Since then, the standards have saved consumers about $500 a year. In response, consumer and conservation groups called the rule changes silly, since there has been no public outcry and because manufacturers have made significant improvements in fixtures. Said Andrew Delaski, executive director of the Energy Conservation Group Appliance Standards Awareness Project, the country faces serious problems. We've got a pandemic, serious long-term drought throughout much of the West. We've got global climate change. Showerheads aren't one of our problems. A South African pilot stationed in Canada, armed with only a cell phone, coordinated the repatriation of 100 South Africans and a score of Zimbabwean students who had been stranded in China due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. After Tertius Myberg was contacted by acquaintances soliciting his advice on how to return home, he began contacting charter companies and aviation officials to lease an airplane and crew and get the necessary permissions. He said that in normal times, the process would require a day or two, but because of lockdowns and the struggling aviation industry, the arrangements took months. He chartered a Boeing 767 from Air Zimbabwe, which enabled him to work with Zimbabwean diplomats who cleared the way with Chinese civil aviation authorities. As the number of people needing repatriation became clear, he linked up with a South African schoolteacher in Guangzhou to coordinate activities on the ground there. On the return home, one of the 767's engines broke down, taking 2 weeks to repair. Some of the passengers had run out of money by then, but they used crowdfunding for support. Namibia has rejected Germany's offer of reparations for colonial killings. German troops reportedly killed 80,000 tribal members during anti-colonial uprisings between 1904 and 1908. Germany, which supplies developmental aid, has been in talks with Namibia since 2015, and the countries have undergone 8 rounds of negotiations. Namibia President H. Gangolp said the current offer was unacceptable without providing details. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Belarus's main opposition leader who lost the disputed presidential election to Alexander Lukashenko, has fled the country in fear for the safety of her children. In a YouTube video, she said she is now safe in Lithuania. Tikhanovskaya, who stood in as a candidate for her husband who had been jailed before the vote, protested the results which showed her receiving only 10% of the vote. Some exit polls showed her getting as much as 80% of the vote, leading to widespread protests that have now continued since the official results were announced on Sunday. Protests turned violent on the third night of demonstrations, with police firing live ammunition into crowds, claiming they acted in self-defense when attacked. At least one foreign news crew from the BBC has been attacked by the police. So far, 6,000 protesters have been detained by police, and 2 have died in police custody. In response, large numbers of women dressed in white and carrying flowers have formed human walls to peacefully protest the detentions and calling for all prisoners to be freed. European Union foreign ministers are scheduled to meet on Friday to discuss sanctions against Belarus. In addition, Lithuania, Poland and Latvia have offered to mediate between the government and the opposition on the condition that Belarusian authorities stop the violence against the protesters. The UK's economy shrank 20.4% in the second quarter after a 2.2% decline in the first quarter, meaning it is now in a technical recession. Recessions are defined as 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline. Most of the quarter's damage was done in April, when the British economy suffered from COVID-19 related lockdowns. Since then, it has shown some improvement, with gains in May and June. The second quarter performance is the worst among comparable advanced economies. French GDP fell by 13.8%, Italy 12.4%, Germany 10.1%, Canada 12%, the United States 9.5%, and Japan 7.6%. Elsewhere, fears are increasing that Latin America and the Caribbean economies will undergo serious contradictions. The International Monetary Fund projects the region could see a 9.4% drop in economic activity for all of 2020. Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Chile are among the 10 worst affected countries in the world. Dutch police arrested 17 people in a raid on what police said was the largest ever cocaine lab in the country. The lab was capable of producing 150 to 250 kilograms of cocaine per day, with a street value of between 5 to 7 million US dollars. At least 3 people have died, including the driver, following the derailment of a train in Stonehaven, Scotland. The train was traveling between Aberdeen and Glasgow. 6 additional people have been taken to the hospital for treatment of non-serious injuries. A treasure hunter found Bronze Age relics estimated to be 3,000 years old in a field near the village of Peebles, about 22 miles south of Edinburgh, Scotland. After contacting Scottish authorities, archaeologists spent 3 weeks uncovering artifacts, including jewelry, a sword, a complete horse harness, buckles, rings, ornaments, a sword still in its scabbard, and axle caps from a chariot. Thousands of Mauritians have turned out to help with the cleanup of an oil spill, ignoring a government order to leave the operation to local officials. Since the Japanese-owned MV Wakashio went aground on July 25th, thousands of inhabitants have taken matters into their own hands, worried the government would not act quickly enough. Already, several schools have closed due to the overwhelming smell of oil and dead fish, killed by the oil that has already leaked. Fears of significant environmental damage have increased in the last several days as winds batter the stranded ship, risking a breakup that would spill thousands of tons more oil into the coastal waters. Mauritius is a home to a vast array of biodiversity, including several species that are endemic to the island. The pink pigeon is one of these species, which recently bounced back from the brink of extinction. As of 2019, there were 470 birds, which is a major increase from its all-time low of 9 birds in 1990. Many are worried that the oil spill could seriously harm Mauritius's endemic species, leaving them critically endangered, or worse, extinct. Pressure is mounting on the government to explain why it has not acted sooner, and there are already calls for the resignations of the ministers of the environment and fisheries. Demonstrators turned out in major Polish cities, including thousands in Warsaw, to protest the conservative government's anti-LGBTQ stance. The protests occurred a day after police arrested a transgender activist. The Polish government has declared the LGBTQ a dangerous alien ideology, and protesters have chanted, "You will not lock all of us up." The European Union has announced that they will withhold funding from the European cities that take this stance. Uber and Lyft have both threatened to shut down service in California in response to a court ruling that the companies must classify drivers as employees rather than independent contractors. Both companies currently classify their drivers as independent contractors. Businesses often prefer independent contractors for the flexibility in structuring payment and to avoid paying minimum wage for all hours worked, overtime, family medical leave and paid sick leave, disability and unemployment insurance contributions, and workers' compensation insurance premiums. In sports, the Big 12 Conference voted to play football games in the fall, joining the Atlantic Coast Conference, which announced its fall football schedule on August 6th. Earlier, the Pac-12 Collegiate Athletic Conference voted unanimously to cancel all sports for the remainder of 2020 for coronavirus concerns. Consisting of universities in the western United States, it becomes the second major conference to halt fall sports, joining the Big Ten, which announced it would suspend 2020 athletic competitions on Tuesday. The SEC is now the only major collegiate sports conference which has not announced its plans for the season. And in gaming news, Microsoft announced that its new Halo Infinite game will be delayed until 2021, though no specific date has been confirmed. Initially, Halo Infinite was expected to launch in time for the holiday season along with the new Xbox Series X, which will be available in November. However, Microsoft said the current work-from-home environment had caused delays and wanted to ensure developers will be able to deliver a Halo experience that meets our vision. The gaming community was generally supportive, indicating it preferred to have a fully functioning game rather than one that was rushed to market, which would require updates and patches. Sony's new PlayStation 5 is also expected to be available for the holidays, though a launch date has not yet been announced.
Thank you so much to Eyevoree for reading the news for us today. Once again, you can find her content at twitch.tv/Eyevoree, on YouTube at Eyevoree ASMR, and links to both in the episode description. This is